Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Facebook Live today. We are so excited to talk to you about chickens. So I have some experts here to introduce to you. I have David Frame and Melanie Stock. Will you just take a couple minutes and let us know what you do here with Extension? We'll start with Melanie.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Dr. Melanie Stock, and I am USU's Urban and Small Farms Specialist. So here at Utah State, I do a lot of different things, but really my program focuses on resource use efficiency and high-value crops for urban and small farms. But I'm really excited because I've also had the opportunity to really work with the animal side of things too. My background is in soil science, and so I actually spent a lot of time studying manure management, and so it's been really exciting to kind of bring that here to Utah and work in a small farms setting.
Okay, and David Frame.
My name is Dr. David Frame, and I'm the Extension Poultry Specialist for Utah State University. And I've been here for 20 years now, coming from industry and also a background in poultry science and poultry medicine. I'm a veterinarian and board certified in the poultry end of things. And it's exciting to be here to talk about things poultry and feathers, mainly chickens, I guess, but whatever questions you have, we'll answer. And so we're glad to be here.
Yeah, well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. It's kind of that time of year when I'm seeing a lot of baby chicks around. Pictures of baby chicks. People are excited for Easter. We've got baby animal days coming up at some of our extension sites. People are buying baby chicks. So is that something you can jump into, or what do you need to know before you really get into that practice of raising your own chickens?
You need to give it some forethought about that and not just go to the feed store and pick up a few birds and then on the way home decide, now what do I do? And I think that's one of the reasons why we're here today is to let you know about some work that we're going to be doing on as far as actually making a chicken course for you and for those who haven't had chickens before, even up to those who have had chickens before. This course is going to be made through Utah State University, and the reason we're doing that is because we want to provide quality information for you as chicken owners. And if you go out on the web, you notice that you find all kinds of things. And basically everybody's an expert. And an expert really has no qualifications, qualifying terms there. We have put together a team to be able to basically have a one-stop shop situation where those who want to learn about chickens and those who have raised them for years can learn some more. And so that's something that's down the pike with us.
Yeah, I think the course is going to be really exciting just in terms of the breadth of information that we'll cover. It's really from start to finish, from getting the chicks all the way on up through raising through adulthood, knowing what to do with the manure. And so I think it'll give anyone who takes it a really great foundation, and then it'll also allow people to decipher what they're seeing online. So by having that great background information, it'll be easier to go on a website and say, that doesn't quite add up based on their background now from this course. So in the meantime, though, if you're going to feed stores, I know I do, and it's always so tempting to bring home baby chicks because they're adorable, and you can think of all the different colors of eggs you could produce. But the first thing really to start with is check with your city regulations. Understand what the laws are in your area. I've found that they really vary across the state of Utah in that some municipalities are quite lax, whereas other ones have really specific guidelines and rules about how many birds you can keep, depending on the size of your property, where you can place the coop, and it really just goes from there. And so I would first check, before bringing the birds home, just check to see how many you can have and if you can even have them, if your property meets the specifications that your city calls for. So to do that, I would Google the name of my city and then backyard chicken laws, things like that. And you should be able to find the information relatively easily.
You could always call your city as well.
That's a great point. Thanks for adding that. There's also a site called backyardchickens.com, and they try to stay abreast of the different regulations across the United States. But
So you mentioned that this course could be for people who have never had chickens or people who've had them for a few years. Is it mostly for small scale people just having chickens for their own, to eat the eggs themselves?
Yes, this is going to be geared for the folks who have a few in their backyard, maybe a few laying hens, even pets, I guess. If a few people have chickens as pets and they have names and all kinds of stuff, and so it's geared mainly for that. But we want to go through some of the science. There's a lot of good stuff out on the web sites. There's no doubt about that. We just want to try to get that all, the main things consolidated that are science-based and give you a basic understanding of how to raise chickens. After that, the little nuances of raising chickens you'll learn as you go along, as you have them in your backyard. But that's the basic type of course that we're putting together. However, we want it deep enough that even those who have had chickens for years can learn something.
Learn something new. So I want to talk some more about this course, but I just wanted to put it out there to you watching. We have some awesome experts here available for you to ask questions. So if you have questions about your flock or your pet chickens, type them in the comments. We would love to get to some of those questions as we go on.
That's why we're here for.
Yeah. We want to answer your questions. So tell me when this course will be available.
Well, right now it's in the construction stage, and we plan on putting this out in modules, but it probably is not going to be done until the finished product will probably not come out, at least until fall, probably maybe into even spring. But as we get these on, we want them posted as we put them on, and so there may be some later on even this summer. But we're looking to really have the whole course in line by the beginning of next year.
Okay, and where will people go to find out more about this course and take this course?
There's a number of places. You have a website on your small farms that could be given, and I also have a website. It's called poultry.usu.edu, and that information will be available on those websites as we construct these things.
Yeah, also USU Extension, the general website, and we'll be sure to have it all over social media, from USU Extension's Facebook page to the Small Farms, USU Small Farms Facebook page, and then we're also on Instagram now too, USU Small Farms on Instagram. So we'll be sure to get the word out as it comes available.
Awesome. Okay, so Melanie, you mentioned that you work with small farms and urban farms. I think it's becoming more common that people are raising chickens in urban settings. Can you just give us some more tips? You mentioned make sure it's legal. That's an important one, especially if you want to keep your neighbors happy. What are some other tips for raising chickens in an urban environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Marta. So I think that a lot of success in raising backyard birds, and I say this as an assistant professor, but also as another Utah resident who has chickens, is to try to incorporate them into your backyard. If you are an avid gardener, for example, urban chickens fit in so well. They really complete the full farm nutrient cycling. So I love growing vegetables and fruits, and so what I have found is that the chickens are fantastic at taking care of a lot of pest problems. I let them into the garden area after the growing season ends, and they pick around. They're also fantastic for eating weeds and taking care. I was digging earlier and planting onions, and I found a big area of slugs. I just let out a bird, and she took care of them real quickly. And so they're just fantastic at scavenging resources. So really try to incorporate them with the rest of your backyard, and it can actually I think increase the aesthetics too. The coops can be really beautiful. There's designer coops out there if you choose to go that way. There's also a lot of plans online that you can purchase or for free and build your own coop. And then I think on the urban side of things, one thing to be really careful about is the manure management, because we do want to keep our neighbors happy with the birds. And so cleaning the coop regularly and just having a plan for what you're going to do with the manure. Are you going to throw it in the garbage, or are you thinking about composting? Because that can be a tremendous way to add nutrients back into the soil.
Okay, so as I was getting ready for this conversation, I ran into our horticulturist Katie Wagner in the hall, and she said, "Oh, are you going to talk about how you can't just take your fresh manure from your chickens and put it right in your garden a week before you plant your brand new tiny, I call them my plant babies."
Oh, the plant
Seedlings.
babies. Yes. That, and I could spend so much time talking about the soil. That's really what I get even more excited about. So chicken manure, actually, when we compare our different livestock manures, chicken manure has some of the highest nutrient content. So we're talking about many of the micronutrients that plants need, but especially the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But with those high nutrient concentrations, the manure also comes with a lot of salt. And so here in Utah, we have to be really careful about our soil salinity to start with. And so
it's high to begin with, usually.
It's high to begin with, and our crops, so when we're talking about backyard gardens, so vegetables and fruits and nuts, those types of crops, they tend to be particularly sensitive to soil salinity. So just to kind of put that in perspective, there's a magic number of 2 as to when plants start to see a decline in performance because the salt salinity is around, or the soil salinity is around 2. Now, poultry manure can have a salinity around 16, and so that's where you wouldn't want to apply it directly to your soil, one, because you would want to be conscientious of potential bacteria and other kind of contamination on your food crops, but also because of that high salt content. And so particularly with plant babies, they have an even lower soil salinity tolerance. Theirs is around 0.75. So a little bit goes a long way is kind of what I like to say. And if you have a lot of extra manure or composted manure, you could consider sharing it with your neighbors. I was at a feed supply store recently, and I found composted chicken manure, and it costs $6.99 for 1.75 pounds of this stuff. So I think you could be doing your neighbors a favor by sharing it too.
Okay, and will that be covered in the course, how to handle the waste from your chicken coop?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, so we aren't going to give away all of the secrets right now, but if you want to learn more about what to do with that manure and how to mitigate that acidity problem, the salinity, I'm probably saying the wrong words here.
They have a high salinity and also a high pH, so it's actually quite alkaline.
You only make that mistake once. I did that, and you put fresh manure on your garden, and you'll find out that you don't need to know about salinity or anything else. You'll just know you've made a mistake.
Oh, but then the next year it's probably okay.
Yeah.
What? It depends. I mean, here in Utah, where we don't get a lot of rain, we do have a pretty nice amount of snowfall. And right now, this spring, we're getting record amounts of rain, I think. That does help leach some of it out. But if your soil is poorly drained, so you have clay underneath your topsoil, or it's just a more typical year, that actually can hang around. And that's one of the questions. It's not just chickens, but one of the most common questions I get from urban and small farmers is their soil tests and having this elevated soil salinity.
Okay, so stay tuned for that course if you want to learn more about dealing with that chicken manure. What other sort of things will you cover in this course?
Well, we want to cover the basic things that you need to raise chickens, but we're also going into some of the science like feeds and feeding. What do you feed chickens? There's a lot of stuff out there on blogs and things on what's good for chickens, what isn't, and we want to talk about that. We want to talk about health and disease. How do you keep your chickens healthy? And how do you keep your neighbor's chickens healthy? Also, you have to think about that. And then we just want to go into a little bit about chickens as far as how they can be a pleasure to raise if they're done right, but also being able to do things right. And so it's going to be a 6-part series on this thing when we're done.
Okay.
But the first part is going to be basically an introduction to chickens and what does one need to really get into business of having some chickens in their backyard. So they just don't go down to the feed store and pick some up.
Okay. We do have a few comments. Casey is tuning in from Sevier County. Hi, Casey. Thanks for joining us. Aubrey's here from Logan, and Sarah also from Logan. Fernando says, this is a great conversation for farmers, companies in America. So we're talking more on a small scale, but these are things that larger producers would need to keep in mind as well.
Well, that's true,
And you work more with poultry producers.
Yes, I work a lot with the commercial poultry producers, and they're very aware of a lot of these things and do a very good job on everything from manure management to producing clean eggs that are very healthy and safe. And so, yeah, we want to try to have this thing broad enough that it just doesn't cover, just a small sector, but something that could be used hopefully for anyone who is raising chickens. But it's geared mainly for the small producer.
Okay. And Shelly says hi. Hi, Shelly.
Hi,
We're glad you're here. Again, if you have any questions for our experts, leave them in the comments, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. Melanie, do you have any more tips about owning chickens in an urban environment?
Sure. So one of the things that I've learned as a chicken keeper, and I just need to say an aside that owning chickens has been one of the highlights of being a homeowner to me. I had wanted birds for so many years, but as a student, I was renting an apartment, and so less than a week after moving into my house, I got chickens, and I knew that they'd be kind of cool to keep, but they have just completely amazed me. Anything from coming home from work and feeling stressed, just hearing the sounds of the birds as they greet me, it automatically has kind of a calming effect. And yeah, they just bring such joy. So
are you saying they're therapy animals?
They are. I think they are.
An emotional support chicken?
Yeah, I like to say that I have two birds in particular that are my best gardeners because they'll actually stay right with me when I'm digging a hole because they want to pick out the worms. Some of them like to wander, but those two, those are my girls for sure. But one of the things that I've learned in keeping chickens this past year is how important it is to really think about where you're going to place your coop in your yard. And so first it comes down to your city regulations. Some cities have codes regarding how close you are to the property line and how close the coop is located to your dwelling. And so that's the first thing to keep in mind. But then to kind of survey your yard and see where the coop would fit in and where there'd be enough room to set a run. So I picked a location in my yard. There was an old sandbox that I built on top of, and it actually has an area in the run that's actually kind of a depression, and so it accumulated water when the snow started to melt and the soil was still frozen, and so it made me kind of think about, was that I wasn't thinking about it in July, I guess is what I'm saying. So think about your yard and think about where they'll fit in. Think about shading and sunlight. How close is it to a water source? Because you're going to need to be changing their water pretty frequently. You also need to store the feed, and so how close is the coop to getting to the feed? And then also my chicken coop and run are very close to my garden so that I can actually make my garden part of their run during the non-growing season. So one of the things that we talk a lot about in horticulture and soil science and agronomy is using cover crops in your garden. So something that enhances the soil. It's something that's planted after your main crop. And so I planted a few last year, and I wasn't even thinking about the chickens, but that actually can be a really great source of greens for them in the winter and just something interesting for them too when they go out on the garden later.
I just want to add that chickens are very adaptable. They're very very easy to raise in many environments, and so people ask me, what's the ideal chicken coop? Well, there isn't one because there's all different kinds, and these designer coops can be extremely valuable as part of your landscape, and it's all in landscape design. And chickens, as long as you provide them out of the wind, in the shade, make sure they're not hot during the summertime, they're very happy in a lot of different types of coops.
So you don't have to have a designer coop.
No, but it's good for you and for your neighbors to have.
Yeah, your neighbors might like it a little better if the coop looks nice from their window.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. We do have a couple questions. Rachel says, how many chickens should I get to provide eggs for a family of 6 with a little extra?
That's a good question because some folks will look at their city regulations and they say, okay, you can keep 10 hens in your backyard. I think in Ephraim, it's something like, where I live, it's something like 25. I don't recall right off. So you think, okay, well, I'm going to go get 10 hens. But 10 hens, once they mature and start laying eggs, think of all the eggs that you're getting. At peak production, you'll get about 90%, which means that 9 out of every 10 hens lay every day. So,
unless you're eating eggs every day, that's a lot of eggs.
but even if you are eating eggs every day, that's a lot of eggs. And so that's the reason, that's a good question, because you plan on how many eggs you eat, and then maybe get enough hens to cover that, and maybe 1 or 2 extra in case, they're not all laying at the same time. Or one dies or something like that. But don't just run out and get whatever your city tells you can get, because unless you've got a large family, you may be giving eggs to the neighbors forever.
They might like that.
Yes.
They might like that. Those of you tuned in that have chickens, I'm curious how many you have in your flock. Rachel has a few more questions. She said, what is the best food to get? And do you have an estimated yearly cost to keep chickens?
There is a yearly cost. I don't recall just what it is right now, but you're looking at depends on what kind of chickens you have. If you have layer chickens, they're going to eat about, once they're full grown, they're going to eat about 1/4 pound of feed a day. And that's your good commercial layer diet. Now, one thing that I need to make sure everyone understands is that if you go to the store, you buy layer chicks, that doesn't mean you immediately go out and start them on layer diets. You have to go through the starter feed to give them the protein so they can grow and everything. And then once they start laying, or just before they start laying, then you go into the layer feed. The reason is because it's very high in calcium. And if you feed that to young birds, you'll have rickets problems. So just because they're layer chickens doesn't mean you immediately go out and feed them layer feed.
Well, it'd be like trying to give a little baby a hamburger.
Exactly.
It's not going to be what they need. They
Exactly.
might love it, but it's not what they need.
The other thing with feeding birds, too, is you go to the store and you'll see something that might say chicken scratch. You have to distinguish between what scratch is and what an actual balanced diet is, too. Scratch is sort of like candy, and it's dessert, and so...
Why would you give a chicken scratch?
Well, there's a number of reasons. First of all, it exercises them. There are some benefits in having them eat the whole grain, and particularly in the wintertime, you give that to them, and it keeps them a little bit warmer because they have to move around, they have to eat that grain, but it doesn't have the vitamins and minerals that they need. And so that it's just like if we were to eat Sour Patch Kids all day, it might taste good, but we don't get all the vitamins we need. So you want to use that in moderation, and don't mistake that for the actual balanced feed.
Okay, great advice. And one last question from Rachel. She said, what are the pros and cons of having a rooster?
The cons, obviously, is if they're not allowed. And there's most municipalities will not allow roosters. I have my own opinions on this, but I'd much rather hear a rooster crowing than an incessant barking dog. And actually, they both have about the same decibel level. So it's almost by tradition that cities have kind of hardwired that into their regulations. The other con there is that if you're just getting eggs, you don't want a rooster treading on those hens. It can actually cause some damage. Obviously, you don't need a rooster for hens to lay eggs. And so if you don't plan on breeding the birds, there's really no reason to have a rooster. In fact, the eggs will actually preserve better if they're unfertilized in your refrigerator and so forth. So.
One of the things that I've heard about roosters, so one of my hens actually was a rooster, so I found out. And so he reached maturity around last fall, and it was the brutality that occurred. And I guess some of it can be kind of personality, but as they would come down from the coop in the morning and come down the run, he would actually bite each one, and so they were kind of afraid. So that actually helped me detach from the rooster and find him another home. So, but he did protect the hens too, and make sure they went to bed right away as it was getting dark. And so they're neat to watch, but it was also a little stressful for me as the owner to see what he did to the hens. But that's because I also kind of view them as pets too. A little softy over here.
It gives new meaning to pecking order.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a rooster.
The pecking order is real in chickens.
I've heard some people call roosters roasters. Is that the right thing? Like they're for roasting, like you eat the roosters.
Actually, they get really tough. Unless you got a pressure cooker, I wouldn't try to roast them.
Okay, good advice. So, David, do you have chickens yourself?
I do not have chickens. I've raised chickens for many years before I got into veterinary school. I actually showed chickens and had a lot of exhibition type birds. I even still judge shows around. But because I work professionally in the industry, but for biosecurity reasons, I cannot actually own birds at home, which makes me cry. But that's the way it is.
Okay, well, you'll have to go visit Melanie's chickens for pets. Okay, Rachel says thank you. Great info. Thank you for your questions, Rachel. So we haven't had any more questions come in. Maybe we'll give a couple more minutes for those.
What I'd like to do is, if you do have any questions, also, if you go on USU's website, poultry.usu.edu, I've got some fact sheets in there on certain things like molting. What is molting? How do you feed chickens, housing, and so forth. If any of you have any ideas or questions on maybe how we can construct some fact sheets for you, please add that too, because that gives us an idea of what you would like to know.
Right, or if you have specific topics within the umbrella of poultry or chickens that you'd like us to do more videos on, we are open to your suggestions. Any last tips for our urban chicken owners or those who are hoping to start flocks this year?
One thing that I would try to recommend, and sometimes you get attached to these chickens for sure, but as far as health and disease goes, it's much better to have an all-in, all-out situation. If you have a few birds, like say 5 chickens, and incidentally, even if you do have a small family and maybe one chicken would do it, chickens do better if there's a group of them. And so you'd probably want at least 3 or 4 so that they can kind of consider themselves as a flock. But a laying hen has a productive life of probably about 2 to 3 years. My recommendation is don't get too attached to them. And then when they have reached that point, you've got to consider getting rid of them and getting some new ones. But have an all-out policy where you don't start getting different ages of birds, birds from different sources and things like that, because that's where people start running into problems.
Like what kind of problems would that cause?
Disease problems mainly, because you can bring in carrier birds that have a disease that your chickens haven't been exposed to and have a disaster. I almost lost every one of my chickens by doing just that, taking them to a show and not quarantining the birds before they came back, and threw them right back in the main flock. And the next day, birds started sneezing, and before long, I had a terrible infectious coryza situation and lost probably about 30% of the birds.
Oh shoot! I don't think I've ever heard a chicken sneeze.
Well, that's good.
I would just add that even though we're living in urban environments, it doesn't mean that predators aren't present. So you want to make sure that your coop and run are secure from wildlife getting in. So I actually had a great horned owl visit my flock just last month. And one of the tips that I had gotten from David earlier was that even the run really should have wildlife netting at the top. So there should be a ceiling. And so I've done a lot of different things to really secure my coop. So thinking about the top of it, also thinking about what could get underneath in the run. Are you closing up the coop at night? Those are all pretty important things. And just really trying to keep wildlife separate from your flock. Don't hang a bird feeder right by where you're keeping your chickens, things like that.
The other thing too is rodent control. You've got to really be careful about that, because wherever chickens are, you've got feed that's spilled, and you're going to have a problem with mice and even worse, rats, if things get out of hand. So keep your feed up and away as much as possible, and also store feed in a closed container somewhere away from the chicken coop, preferably in a cooler area. The vitamins and minerals, the vitamins particularly in that feed, can degrade if it's out where it gets warm for any length of time. But mainly just so that neighborhood rodents don't start accumulating there. That really is one of the bigger problems in urban chicken raising.
Okay. We have a few more questions. Sarah is wondering what you can do to keep your chickens safe for winter in Cache Valley. So I'm assuming that means temperature. Gets pretty cold in Cache Valley.
Temperature is a big one. The wind chill factor is actually the biggest one. As long as you keep them inside and keep them out of the wind, they can withstand pretty low temperatures. But if your water is freezing consistently 1 or 2 times a day, then it's probably best to think about what you can do to warm them up. And one way is just drop a incandescent light bulb in there. Incandescent light bulbs are getting hard to find nowadays but they do give off enough heat just to kind of keep the chill off a little bit.
Would you just do that in the daytime? Do they need some period of dark at night?
If it's really cold, you might not have any choice than to have to do it at night too. But there are also these water heaters that you would want to use too, because if it's cold enough to cause some problems in your coop, it's going to freeze your water. And the worst thing you can do is have chickens go without water. They won't eat, and then they won't lay eggs and so forth. So think about those things. But it's actually the wind chill that's going to cause usually any damage by freezing and so forth.
And are there some chicken varieties that do better, that are hardier breeds that do better in the cold weather?
There are a few, but basically it's completely personal preference on what you do. There's none that are extremely hardy to cold weather, other than maybe a few that might be hard to get. Chanticleers and Buckeyes, for instance, were bred in cold weather just for those reasons, and some others also. But it's more of a care than it is the breed. And so that's the reason why chickens, you can have designer chickens, because you can really have whatever you want, even a mixture of them if you like.
Okay.
So I guess just to add on to that, the heated water was really helpful for me in Cache Valley this past winter. So it was worth the money spent. I spent a little bit trying to insulate the coop, and I read a lot of information. I'm actually curious what David's opinion is that, so I added a lot of sawdust so that there'd be kind of an insulative layer, and I made sure to clean the coop pretty often because the wet feces can actually make them cold, I've heard. But some people like to add a lot of straw, and I've heard that that's not good to do because it doesn't dry out as well. And I'm wondering if that's true or
well, my preference is pine shavings. Straw's okay, but it doesn't quite have the absorbent capacity and the insulation capacity that pine shavings do. When you think about what you can do to your coop to make it so that it's a little more comfortable for them, think of the roof. That's where you really want the insulation in there, and so you want about an R21 on your roof. If you do anything with the sides or try to close them in, be sure you don't close them in so tight that you start having a humidity problem in there. That's worse than the cold. So just anything you can do to kind of keep the wind down, keep a good bedding underneath them. And again, I would suggest pine shavings myself.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, Andrea says you can get ceramic heat lamps that don't emit light.
That's even better.
For your coop.
Yes.
All right, this question comes from our friends over at USU Extension Beef Cattle. Mm-hmm. So we do poultry and beef cattle here. They say, what is the best way to remove spurs from roosters? First of all, for those of us that don't know, what is a spur?
A spur is kind of it's actually a bony outcropping that comes off the shank, on the inside of the shank. And it's interesting that some breeds actually have spurs on the hens too. The best way to get those things off is with side cutter dikes. If you have to, probably I wouldn't take them all the way off. I just take a little bit off so that they get that sharp edge off of there. But
why would you remove the spurs?
If it's causing problems with treading on the hens and causing damage that way with the skin, it's probably best to get the rooster out of there rather than try to mess with the
spurs.
Spurs. But
So the Spurs, they could just potentially injure one of the other
yes,
hens in the flock.
or themselves too. One interesting thing about chicken behavior, Chicken 101, is that you can raise roosters together from day one, and they usually will spar a little bit, but not really cause any damage. But if you separate them for even overnight and then try to put them back together, you've got a real problem. And it's very interesting that way.
They're competitive.
Yep.
Roosters are competitive. Okay, well, we've caught up on all of our questions for today. Any last thoughts about your upcoming course, or any more advice for our viewers?
Well, we're really excited about this course, and we want to give you a lot of good information. We are also going to cover some of the urban legends, I guess you could call it, as far as chicken raising goes. And
will you tease us with one urban legend?
Well,
Give us a hint.
I think a good one is that you read out there all the time that backyard eggs are safer than commercial eggs you buy in the store. And that's a definite falsehood. The commercial industry has to go through extreme government regulations to make sure they give us a good product out into the marketplace. And just because eggs are raised in the backyard doesn't mean they're going to be any more safe. In fact, it could be the other way around. I was just reading on CDC's Central Center for Disease Control on outbreaks of salmonella in 2018, and there were 334 outbreaks of salmonella in chickens last year. All of them were in the backyard, no commercial birds at all.
Wow.
And the next highest prevalence of salmonella outbreaks in humans was guinea pigs. So what that tells me is that there are some things to learn out there as far as food safety and egg quality, and we're going to cover all that stuff for you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Melanie and David. We appreciate your expertise, and we are so looking forward to the course you have coming out. As David mentioned before, if you're interested in taking this online course on how to raise chickens start to finish, we're hoping that those first modules will be out near the end of the summer, but definitely by next spring, all 6 modules will be completed.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned, and we did share the links to poultry.usu.edu and the Small Farms Program website further up in the comments, so you can check there for more information. Thanks so much for your questions and for tuning in, and we will see you next time.